How's that, everyone?
Really useful.
Thanks, Faye. Any reflections? Oh, no, someone coming in there, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say exactly the same, Richard. I was kind of curious or interested in what did people, what were some of the things that people spoke about?
One of the observations in the team I was in, we had a mixture of public, private sector, not-for-profit, and we were just saying it almost feels like it doesn't matter what sector you're in at the moment, that senior teams feel quite fraught with, I used, quite high levels of stress. You kind of worry about team and individual health. Then to your point earlier, how does that affect decision making? My view is that dynamic between perform and transform has really played out in my organisation. We're part of a merger 18 months ago, so that's really significant in terms of kind of keeping the wheels on the bus from a performance perspective. Keep hitting the kind of in-year numbers versus very, very stretching targets to deliver synergies to our shareholders for the purpose of the merger, which are across a more extended period. And that dynamic of perform and transform is really significant in our organisation at the moment. But we also talked about how you can set a 3-year plan and within 6 months it needs sort of iterations because of how rapidly the world evolves. So that kind of short-term view versus long-term view, what is long-term at the moment, because we just have to iterate our 3-year plans so regularly.
Interesting that it's across all 3 sectors, as you say, Ali, and also that I think, Andrew, I love the way you articulated and put into detail the point Ali makes about ETs being more fraught than ever, in a sense, and why that is, and what they're feeling in terms of anxieties and yeah.
Well, I think it's a more broader, more general point. We were talking as a consultancy just about how challenging our work is at the moment, and some of the difficult dynamics and projects that we're being invited into. And I think it's something about what could be can only, well, for me, I understand it as kind of post-pandemic effects that we're working a lot more virtually, relationships seem to be a lot more transactional, people are exhausted, there's much less capacity, people have to kind of processing kind of difficult stuff and difficult emotions, and then I think the propensity for people to kind of split and project onto others and attack people or have paranoid thoughts just seems to be more prevalent, which even if you haven't been through that process as yourself as a member of an executive team, to lead in that context is extraordinarily difficult, really.
I was taken, actually, on that note, the fact you were saying in the presentation about taking the ETs taking on other people's emotions and anxieties, which makes perfect sense. Although it's interesting, it's a contrast, because it's not unknown for people in organisations to wish that ETs were rather more empathetic. So I suppose both are true in a sense.
Yes, and I think different members of the executive and different teams invite different projections. I remember talking to one chief exec in an NHS trust who was, kind of older woman, and she said, I feel this kind of enormous pressure to kind of mother everyone and make sure everyone is feeling okay and looked after. It's kind of somewhat unrealistic given the context.
We hear that a lot from our members in terms of HR's perspective, that and their responsibilities put on them as well. Pippa, can I zip to you, because you were making some good points in the chat about empowerment? I'd just like to draw you in on that, if I may.
Yes. I was just thinking, actually, listening to Andrew then, that mood is a real contagion. So I think it really have a real opportunity to kind of amongst themselves with the sessions to set the tone. How are we going to show up today, and then obviously more broadly. But if you've got, a chief exec who's really negative or whatever it might be, that will just set the tone, and it will be contagious for the rest of the session.
Exactly, yeah. And I think the visibility, sometimes I think, I don't know what the answer to this question, but I wonder sometimes how aware executive teams are of the shadow that they cast across their organizations and about how scrutinized their behavior is. And that you or I can say something in a meeting, and it will have an impact in the meeting, and the executive might say something in a meeting, and all of a sudden that is being spoken about across the organization and beyond.
Yeah,
and how they say it and how it lands.
To kind of get a neuroscientist in, and just talk. They're quite simple. No one's surprised when you talk about we're all in a threat position because of these.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Actually, just having at the beginning of the session, just talking about some positives of what's going on can totally change those filters for the rest of the session. So I think there are some really simple things you can do to help set that tone, drive awareness as well.
I mean, quite often I've found myself, I think just this idea, whether you express it through neuroscience or different psychological models, but the idea that we take on other people's emotions through a kind of empathetic reaction or response and then can play that out. There was one team in our research, and they were overseeing an integration or a divestment, and a divestment from two businesses of healthcare, large healthcare businesses, which they were going to be reintegrated into a new business. Extraordinarily complex international piece of work. And the leadership team basically took a day where they did kind of checked in with each other, and they were telling us how people were in tears and overwhelmed. And the more that they talked about how they were feeling, the more that they were able to notice that how they were feeling was a reflection and a mirror of how the organization was feeling. And I think they can have that thought, then that's very useful, because then that's something that they can use and they can act on, and it helps them to understand something. But if they don't have that thought, then they're just acting into and reinforcing the existing dynamic or emotional dynamics in the organization.
Pippa, I love your line about mood is a contagion, and also the one they put in the chat. LTs like to understand the science, otherwise it sounds a bit hippie.
Yeah, because actually even things like mindfulness, there's so powerful, some of the things that you can do, but it can sound hippie if you don't actually share some of the really hard cold facts with them. On empowerment, I wish I had the holy grail, Richard. It is something that our leadership team talks about empowering, but somehow we just get back to that command and control, so yeah. I'm welcome any other ideas or where they've seen people do things that have really helped. We're just trying to drive more awareness, I think.
Yes, got you.
I think that Sarah made a good point in our breakout group. She was all talking about the illusion of a team. That we refer to I think she gave some examples of her experience of the executive team, or being in kind of, well, my words, not hers, in name only, but there was a bit of not actually acting and working as a team.
So that's point. You can come in there, Sarah.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to get on mute. Yeah, I think it's everybody sort of gets sucked into, whether it be their finance column or their people column or their marketing column or whatever it might be, and that always seems to take precedence over that more horizontal view. Yeah, so when push comes to shove, it's what's happening in my empire, for want of a better word, as opposed to actually the bigger organization. And the fact that we talked a bit about the urgent versus the important, and about how the urgent always takes preference, and this idea of having to have a short, medium and long-term timescale. And I think somebody else just said, well, what is long-term these days? And it is an interesting point. But if as an executive team you're not taking that view, the medium term is certainly, I think Andrew, you said they suddenly, tomorrow is today, and you're putting out a fire. So how do you actually support executive teams to be able to take that longer view when actually day to day and real world is pulling them all the time into their independent sort of silos and areas? So working to create that sense of, if not a team, but in a sense, purpose and what we're here for and where we add the value. I think that can also help to create, if not a team as such, at least a group of people who do have some kind of common purpose.
Nice point. If not a team, at least a group that have some sort of common purpose. Is a nice way of putting it. There's two excellent points in the chat. Thank you, Jen and Alan. I just want to go to Rosie now to finish. Rosie, welcome.
Thanks, Richard. It's been an interesting session hearing all these different challenges from everyone in their different departments and different companies. I've typically been in startup scale-ups, you know, starting small, growing, getting huge. And I've actually found that most times you can affect change. You do need to be a little bit of a tiger in HR. You do need to actually be able to use the power of HR. Despite them being your bosses, people will listen to you. You know, one of the things I do very early on when I join any business, you know, first thing, we set up a leadership training. You know, we're going to have a session. I need to know what everybody's quirks are. I need to know who's going to show up, so I know which people I need to work on. And, you know, make sure that everybody attends and actually really do the case for selling the importance of having that training, because it helps to actually bond the leadership team. It helps to bond the execs when they're actually going through the process of learning something together and discovering nuances about themselves that they hadn't even considered were nuances, which you get a lot of revelation when you attend some of these courses. You know, you're like, oh, wow, I didn't know, actually, I do this. I didn't realize that. And consequently, also making sure that there's this transparency in accountability. We use Notion, and the executive team are not immune from having a channel that's private to the executive team. Everybody has to have accountability. So when we set the agenda, no matter what role you have, CEO, founders, you still have your action points. And in the meeting, you're asked, where are you with this? So it changes the mindset from godlike to we're all in this battle together. Because unfortunately, if you keep allowing that difference in mindset of, yeah, actually, I'm too senior for you to challenge me, nothing's going to change.
No.
That's my 2 cents.
And it's a good 2 cents. And I love the be a tiger in HR and the power of HR. That's fantastic. Nice note to end on. Thank you, Rosie. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Andrew, thank you for such an excellent presentation. Please do stay on and have a look at the feedback. Please do leave some feedback in the chat. We'd love to see that. And we'll see you next time. Keep sharing the WhatsApp groups. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you for inviting me, Richard. Thank you. Good to
Thank
meet you.
you.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.